And so I've chosen to read something from the book of Isaiah. It's not a part of the plan this morning, but I'm just going to do it. From Isaiah 43, if you're interested in watching there. But I remember just a few years ago, someone sent me a card, and it showed someone that's built like me, looking at himself in the mirror. And in the mirror, it shows what he thinks he's seeing. A big, muscular man. And sometimes our view is different. Did anyone ever send you a card that on the outside it said, I hear that you're about to have a facelift? And I wasn't, never. And when you open it up, it says, I don't advise that. In your case, it would be like rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. So, you know, do I have your permission to speak to you as one who's very tired today? And just to think, I volunteered for this. I wanted to finish up some things that were useful to you, I hope. In chapter 3 of Isaiah, in verses 19 through 21, I read this. Behold, God says, I do a new thing. Now it shall spring forth. Shall you not know it? I will even make a road in the wilderness and rivers in the desert. The beasts of the field will honor me, the jackals and the ostriches, because I will give waters in the wilderness and rivers in the desert, to give drink to my people, my chosen. This people I have formed for myself, they shall declare my praise. And looking just across the page in chapter 44 of Isaiah, this follows it up. 44 of Isaiah, and if you have it, I want you to follow me here in verse 3. God continues to speak. For I will pour water on him who is thirsty, and floods on the dry ground. Now notice this. I will pour my spirit on your descendants, and my blessing on your offspring. We often think of this as we read the book of Isaiah as something that was going to happen then, and it could have, and did in some ways, and it happened when the Apostle Peter preached his sermon on the day of Pentecost. But have you ever considered that this may be a prophecy that has to do with today? You read it in Joel chapter 2, and you'll start with about verse 28. I can find the book of Joel here really quickly. Joel, chapter 2 and verse 28. I know that that's what it is. God's Spirit poured out. And it shall come to pass afterward, this is what it says, afterward, this is what Joel was saying, that I will pour out my Spirit on all flesh, your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men, they didn't leave us out, your old men will dream dreams, and your young men shall see visions. This is very much like what we just read there, and I apologize for not turning on the mic. Here it goes. Okay. Hold your ears. Can you hear now? Okay. You can turn it up like you did last week if you want. The folks can stand it. But here we are. Joel is saying the same thing that was said by God through Isaiah. And then this same prophecy that we just read in Joel is something that Peter, the Apostle Peter, preached on the day of Pentecost. And he added something. Peter added something. And he was quoting this very passage. He said, and it shall come to pass in the last days, says God, that I will pour out my Spirit on all flesh. Your sons and your daughters shall prophesy. Your old men, your young men shall see visions, and your old men shall dream dreams. Isaiah says, I will pour water on those who are thirsty. I will pour out my Spirit. This morning, we want to get around to making that real. But what you see here is that God is saying, the Holy Spirit, water, I'm going to pour it out like water. The Holy Spirit is also represented by fire, by oil in the Bible, and in one case, God uses bread to represent the Holy Spirit. I want to share that with you today. Bread for a journeying friend. Now, last week we looked at something that depicted a journey. You didn't know it, but there were 12 steps in the message that we presented last week. That's a journey. And how many of us are on a journey? Okay, every one of us. And once you take the first step, once you begin, once you hear a calling, and you're aware that there's a supreme being out there, step after step after step after step will lead you to ground zero, the day when you're a born-again Christian. That's the way the Holy Spirit wants it, and He wants to use us in that. This morning I wanted to name this Bread for a Journeying Friend. And I want to start with an illustration. Anna Mae and I were at General Conference 3 years ago, wasn't it, Anna Mae? Yeah, it was. And we came to one of the early morning meetings, and there was a special speaker, Dr. Dwight K. Nelson. And he used an illustration I'm going to copy. I found out later that he learned it from a man named, well, he was a trans analyst named Chris Martinson. And he created the illustration we're going to use here in order to talk about the exponential function that people in the world don't seem to know anything about. We know something about compounding, but there are things going on. Now, this is, you can't see Boston here, but it's where the Boston Red Sox play. Does anyone remember the name of that field? Fenway Park, yes. I've never been there, but it's quite a large park. Take a look at the seating capacity. Now, in illustration, suppose we're going to have an assumption here. I want to go back to this old painting. It's more comfortable. And you can see way up here, there's a canopy. And the highest bleachers are right here. Now, imagine that this whole park is watertight. From this level all the way around. And I'm going to ask one of you to be experimented with. And so we would take you up to the top bleacher here, sit you down, and handcuff you to one of the immovable seats there. You've heard this before. That's okay. We're going to use it anyway. So then the next assumption is that this eyedropper I have is a magic eyedropper. Now this is all a mathematical illustration. The eyedropper has magic water in it. And I'm going to take it out here to the pitcher's mound. You can see that. And I'm going to take it out here, and on the pitcher's mound, drop one drop of water. Now you're up there. It's 12 noon when I drop this first drop of water. The magic thing about the water is that every 60 seconds, it multiplies, it doubles. You know, after a minute, at 12:01, 2 drops, and then 4 drops, and then 8, and then 16 and 32, and on and on. There you are, handcuffed to the very top bleacher, and it looks like a dry surface, and it's hard to find a dry surface surrounding here. I started not to use this illustration because we've had so much rain. But how much time do you think you would have to get loose if you were handcuffed up there when we dropped that first drop of water? With that mathematical progression being used. Anybody? Huh? Okay. I wouldn't have known either. And I don't know the equation. However, the transanalyst lets us know and illustrates it by much research that at 12:44, 44 minutes after we dropped the first drop, there would be 5 feet of water on the floor of Fenway Park. Now, how think you would need to break loose? Exactly 12:49, the water would reach all the way up past the top bleacher, and you'd be 20 feet under the water. Just 5 minutes. 5 minutes before, there was 5 feet, and only 7% of the stadium was filled. Now, in 5 minutes, a very short time, 93% of the work was done. You know, that could suggest something to us. 93% of the work got done, filled to the brim. Well, it was Albert Bartlett that said the greatest shortcoming of the human race is that our inability to understand the exponential function. He's not a Christian, nor was the transanalyst, Dr. Martins. But they can see so many things. Now, after Martinson gives us this equation, he goes on with he begins to show us other hockey stick measures. I call it a hockey stick. Well, this is what I heard. Because there's the handle of the hockey stick, and here's where you hit the hockey puck. And this is another one of those things, the exponential function, world population. Now, I put this here because these guys were not Christians, and they're evolutionists, but that's all right. They couldn't go back here and find out what the population was, 10,000 BC. And so I put it right here about 4,000 years ago. And then we can put some statistics and measures together and know more or less what the population was. So you see this broad, general, slight slope until we get to AD 1. 1,000 years later, it's still not too high. But look at this. It begins to move very quickly, exponentially. And it goes up so that in the year 2000, we were close to 7 billion people. And what are we going to do with another 2 or 3 billion people in another 20 to 40 years? So there are a number of exponential explosions occurring around us. The world energy consumption, here it is, back in 1820, it was quite smooth. But here, look at what is happening now that you have China and India online. Exponential. We're using energy, and where we're going with this. How about U.S. debt? I remember preaching to you, and I mentioned this in a previous sermon, I remember preaching when the debt was only $12 trillion. That was in 2008. Well, now it's way up here. We don't have a scale for it. It's 16.5, is it? Close to $17 trillion. And look at the slope of the curve. Look at the slope of the curve there. Where are we headed? Whatever is going to get done, at this point, you have to confess that it's going to have to be done in a short period of time. That has implications that I hope we'll have a chance to get to this morning. Earthquakes, well, you can see here, the first 1,000 years after Christ, there were 9 recorded. We don't know about the recording capacity in here, but we know that starting about here in 1400, 1, 2, each century, 7, 13, 26, 184 in this century, and now in the first 10 years of 2000, in this millennium, there have been 297. These are just the the earthquakes over 6 magnitude up. Things are changing. You see an exponential curve, and we're in it. Sitting in the bleachers up there.